the sound hit me first, a high, angry whine that cut through the calm summer afternoon. It was the sound of a predator, and it didn't belong here, not next to the climbing wall where the only sounds should be the scrape of shoes on rock and the laughter of kids. I put down the water bottle and walked around the corner of the community center, and then I saw them. Two men in dusty work boots holding chainsaws, idling with a low growl. They were standing in front of my shed, not just any shed. It was my armory, my library, the heart of my little climbing school. Inside was $15,000 worth of ropes, harnesses, and gear I'd spent years collecting. More than that, it held memories. And between the workers and my shed stood Brenda. If you've been watching Karenology for any length of time, you know this type. 45, blonde, with a smile that never reached her eyes, and a posture that screamed she owned any room she walked into. As a board member of our homeowners association and an insurance broker, she wielded rules like a weapon. Today she'd brought a twin. Standing right beside her was a woman who was her exact copy. Same haircut, same sharp blue blazer, same smug expression. It was like a glitch in the matrix, designed to be unsettling. "What do you think you're doing?" I asked, my voice tight. Brenda's smile widened a fraction. "We're cleaning up a liability, Maya." She gestured towards the shed with a perfectly manicured hand. "It's a hazard." One of the workers, a big guy with a bored expression, took a step forward and kicked something out of his path. It skittered across the gravel with a metallic ring. My stomach clenched. It was my wrench, a vintage steel wrench with a small faded engraving on the handle. It was my symbol anchor, the tool I used to personally check every single anchor on that wall before a single kid clipped in. It was my promise of safety. I walked forward, picked it up. The metal was cool in my hand. "This shed was approved by the board 5 years ago," I said, looking straight at Brenda. "I have the paperwork." "Oh, I know," she said, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. "But things change, standards evolve." She pulled a folded paper from her blazer pocket and held it out. "Our insurance provider issued a new directive last week." I took the paper. The words swam in front of my eyes, but the meaning was brutally clear. All non-compliant wooden structures within a 50-foot radius of a designated high-activity zone must be demolished. The alternative? Replace it with a certified fireproof structure. The estimated cost was printed in bold at the bottom, $25,000. Have you ever been handed a piece of paper that basically tells you your life is about to get very, very difficult? It's a strange feeling, like the world tilting on its axis. My climbing school barely broke even. That kind of money was a universe away. "I never received this," I said, my voice dangerously quiet. "There's a 30-day notice period for any new directive." Brenda and her twin exchanged a look. It was a flicker, so fast I almost missed it, but it was pure, venomous satisfaction. "That's odd," Brenda said, her tone suggesting it wasn't odd at all. "It was sent out to all homeowners. Maybe you should check your spam folder." The lie was so blatant it was almost impressive. The notice was never sent. I knew it, she knew I knew it, but she had the paper, the workers, and the chainsaws. She had the power. The workers looked at her, waiting for the signal. The chainsaws revved, a hungry, impatient sound. My equipment, my school, my promise to those kids, all of it was about to be turned into sawdust. Brenda crossed her arms. "The clock is ticking, Maya. We're just trying to ensure the safety of the children." The mention of children was the final twist of the knife. This wasn't about safety. This was a declaration of war. I looked her dead in the eye, my grip tightening on the cool steel of the wrench. "Get off my side of the property line," I said, my voice low and even. "Now." For a second, nobody moved. The air was thick with the smell of gasoline and cut grass. The two workers looked from me to Brenda, waiting to see who would flinch first. Brenda's perfect smile tightened. It was the slightest change, but on her face, it was a seismic event. She hated being challenged, especially in front of an audience. "This isn't over, Maya," she said, her voice dropping to a near whisper. It was more threatening than any shout. She gave a sharp nod to the workers. "We're done here, for now." They shut off the chainsaws. The sudden silence was almost as loud as the noise had been. Without another word, the three of them turned and walked away, their shoes crunching on the gravel path. I stood there, the wrench still heavy in my hand, my heart hammering against my ribs. I'd won the battle, but I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that the war had just begun. That's the thing about people like Brenda. They don't fight fair. They don't come at you head on. They go for the foundations. And that's exactly what she did. That evening, my phone buzzed. It was a notification from the neighborhood online forum. I almost ignored it, but a knot of dread in my stomach made me open the app. The top post was from Brenda. The title was "A Word of Caution for Our Community's Parents." My blood ran cold. The post was a masterpiece of passive-aggressive slander. She never mentioned my name directly, but everyone knew who she was talking about. She wrote about the importance of certified professionals and impeccable safety records. Then came the line that felt like a punch to the gut. She brought up the accident. Let me back up. 2 years ago, a kid broke his arm on my watch. He was a good climber, but cocky. I had told him very clearly not to attempt a specific move without a top rope. He waited until my back was turned for a second, tried it anyway, and fell. The investigation cleared me completely. The Park District called it a case of a kid being a kid. But I never forgave myself. That's a weight you carry. Have you ever had a moment you play over and over in your head, wondering what you could have done differently? Brenda knew that was my ghost, and she was parading it in front of the whole town. Her post ended with a chilling line: "We must ask ourselves if certain recreational activities, run by individuals with a documented history of incidents, are worth the risk." The comments started immediately. It was like watching a shark frenzy. "I always had a bad feeling," one wrote. "Thank you for bringing this to our attention, Brenda," another chimed in. They came so fast, one after another, all echoing the same sentiment. It felt coordinated, unnatural. These weren't real parents, they were a digital mob, summoned with a keystroke. Then the attack jumped platforms. A notification from my GoFundMe page, the one I used to raise money for new ropes. "A user has flagged your campaign for review." I refreshed the page. The donations, which had been slowly trickling in, had flatlined. 0. Then I checked my Google reviews. My little school, which had a proud 4.9-star rating, now had a new 1-star review. "Reckless and unsafe, avoid at all costs." Then another. And another. Within an hour, my rating had plummeted to 2.1. I sank onto my couch, the phone feeling like a block of ice in my hand. This was her plan, not to destroy my shed, but to destroy me, to poison the well, turn the community against me, and make it impossible for me to run my program. She was hitting me where I was most vulnerable, my past and my purpose. I felt a wave of helplessness wash over me. How do you fight whispers? How do you defend yourself against a ghost? I was still staring at the screen, watching my reputation being systematically dismantled, when another email popped up. The sender was the County Parks and Recreation Department. The subject line made my heart stop. It read, "Formal complaint and mandatory safety review." The email was short, formal, and brutal. A formal complaint had been filed regarding potential safety violations and unpermitted structures. A mandatory on-site safety review was scheduled for the following week. Failure to comply would result in the immediate suspension of my operating permit. It didn't say who filed the complaint, but it didn't need to. Brenda's fingerprints were all over it. This was escalation. First, the physical threat with the chainsaws. Then, the public shaming online. Now, the official bureaucratic attack. She was boxing me in from all sides. If you've ever dealt with a bureaucracy, you know it's a game played on their turf, by their rules. And they've got all the time in the world. I spent the next 2 days in a blur of frantic preparation. I pulled out every piece of paper I had. My original permit, my insurance policy, every inspection report from the last 5 years. I wanted to build a fortress of facts. My climbing school wasn't just a hobby. It was the one thing that pulled me out of the darkness after my own climbing career ended with a fall. Teaching those kids, seeing their confidence grow, it was my lifeline. And I wasn't going to let Brenda take it from me without a fight. I decided to start with the obvious path, a counterattack. I needed help, someone who knew how the system worked. That led me to David. David was a retired city planner who lived on the other side of the neighborhood. He was in his 70s with a mind as sharp as a draftsman's pencil and a deep-seated dislike for the homeowners association. He'd seen them abuse their power for years. I found him tending his prize-winning roses, a stark contrast to the digital battlefield I was trapped in. He listened patiently as I laid out the whole story, spreading my documents on his patio table. The sun was warm, but I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. David looked over the papers, his brow furrowed in concentration. He tapped a finger on the insurance directive Brenda had given me. "This is her opening move," he said. "Aggressive, but it's just a piece of paper. The real fight is here," he said, tapping the notice from the county. He spent an hour poring over my documents and the HOA's public records online. I felt a small flicker of hope. He was a professional, a man who understood the language of permits and zoning. But after a while, he leaned back with a sigh. "She's covered her tracks, Maya. The directive, the complaint. It's all by the book. It stinks, but it's legal." My hope fizzled out. "So that's it? I just let them shut me down?" "Not so fast," he said, a glint in his eye. "She's playing chess. We just need to find the move she doesn't see coming." He went back to the HOA's financial statements, scrolling through pages of expenditures. Mostly boring stuff. Lawn care, pool maintenance, administrative fees. Then he stopped. He leaned closer to his screen, squinting. "That's funny," he muttered, more to himself than to me. It was a phrase that hung in the air, a detail that didn't fit. "What is it?" I asked, leaning in. "The landscaping budget," he said, pointing to a line item. "They're paying a fortune for ground maintenance on the east border of the property." He clicked a link, and a company name popped up. But this company, they don't do landscaping. Their main business is installing telecom towers. It felt like a piece from a different puzzle. What did a telecom company have to do with landscaping, or my shed? "I don't get it," I said. "What does that mean?" David shook his head. "I don't know yet, but people like Brenda don't overpay for services by accident." He logged off and looked at me, his expression serious. "Forget the shed for a minute. This isn't about the shed. The shed is the distraction." I left David's house with my head spinning. The shed was the distraction? It felt like the entire conflict, the center of my world for the past few days. But his words stuck with me. As I walked home, I noticed something I hadn't before. Brenda, who was often out walking her dog, would always slow down near the east side of the park, near the climbing wall. She'd stop, pull out her phone, and seem to be checking something. Always in that same spot. Always looking at that same stretch of empty land beyond the wall. It was just a weird habit, a strange detail. But in the new light of David's discovery, it felt like a clue, a crack in her perfectly constructed facade. The problem wasn't what I thought it was, and that meant the solution wasn't where I was looking. The game had just changed. I just didn't know the new rules yet. The words, "the shed is the distraction," echoed in my head for the next 48 hours. It was a maddening thought. If it wasn't about the shed, what was it about? Was it just a personal vendetta? Or something bigger? I felt like I was staring at a climbing route in the dark, able to see the first few handholds, but not the path to the top. I decided to play the game, at least for now. If Brenda wanted to fight over the shed, I'd give her one. But I'd do it my way. I spent a whole day researching, not legal codes, but materials, fire retardant panels, steel framing, mineral wool insulation. My background isn't just climbing. It's about systems, stress points, and finding the most efficient way to achieve a goal. It's problem solving at its core. Using that skill, I drew up a detailed proposal. I could retrofit the existing shed, bringing it up to fire code for a fraction of what Brenda's phantom contractor was quoting. My cost, $5,000. It was money I didn't really have, but it was a concrete, logical solution. It was an undeniable show of good faith. It was, I thought, checkmate. I needed an ally on the inside, someone who could present the plan at the next board meeting. That's where Tom came in. Tom was a young engineer who lived a few houses down. He was sharp, idealistic, and had just gotten his own backyard project approved by the board after a long fight. He understood the frustration. He was my in. I walked him through my plan, showing him the material specs and the cost breakdown. He was impressed. "This is solid, Maya," he said, nodding. "It's airtight. They can't argue with this. It saves the community money and solves the safety issue. I'll present it at the emergency meeting." For the first time in a week, I felt a surge of hope. This was the obvious solution, the logical path forward. I had a plan. I had an ally. The board couldn't possibly refuse such a reasonable compromise. Right? The night of the meeting, the community center was buzzing. It felt less like a homeowners meeting and more like a public trial, my trial. I saw the faces from the online forum, whispering and pointing. Brenda and her twin sat at the head of the table, looking serene and in control. Tom stood up to present. He started strong, laying out the problem and then unveiling my proposal. He put the cost comparison on the overhead projector, my $5,000 versus the $50,000 for a new build. The numbers spoke for themselves. A murmur went through the room. A few people nodded in approval. I felt my shoulders relax a little. This was working. And then it happened. Tom paused. He cleared his throat. He wouldn't look at me. However, he said, his voice suddenly strained, after a more thorough review, I have some concerns. The room went silent. What was he doing? Maya's calculations, he continued, looking at his notes, they don't fully account for a worst-case scenario. A fire could still spread. The liability to the homeowners association would be significant. It was like a physical blow. Betrayal is a funny thing. It doesn't just hurt, it steals the air from your lungs. I stared at Tom, trying to catch his eye, but he just kept reading from his script, his voice monotone. He was torpedoing his own presentation, my presentation, my last hope. When he sat down, Brenda stood up, a look of grave concern on her face. "Thank you, Tom, for your diligence," she said. "This is exactly why we need to listen to our experts." She then announced that, given the unacceptable risk of my plan, the board had no choice but to accept the only safe alternative, a new pre-approved $50,000 structure to be funded by a special assessment on all homeowners. The room erupted. People were yelling about the cost, but Brenda's voice cut through the noise. "Safety has no price tag," she declared. I was frozen in my seat. She had won. She had turned my ally, twisted my logic, and cornered the board into approving a ludicrously expensive project that would benefit her secret contractor. She had made me the villain and herself the savior, all while engineering a $50,000 payday. As I watched her bask in her false victory, I felt something shift inside me. The hurt was still there, but it was crystallizing into cold, hard anger. This was never about the shed. David was right, and it wasn't just about money. As Tom gathered his papers, avoiding my gaze, his hand trembled. It wasn't the hand of a confident engineer. It was the hand of a man who had been threatened. Brenda hadn't persuaded him. She had broken him, and I knew, with absolute certainty, I was next. I walked out of that meeting without saying a word. The noise, the arguments, the smug look on Brenda's face, it all faded into a dull roar in my ears. The only thing I could feel was the icy burn of betrayal. Have you ever trusted someone, only to watch them publicly throw you under the bus? It hollows you out. I didn't go home. I went to the climbing wall. The moon was bright, casting long, distorted shadows. The air was cool and still. I stood at the base of the wall, running my hand over the rough texture of the holds. This was my sanctuary, the one place where the world made sense. Gravity was honest. A hold either supported you or it didn't. There were no hidden clauses, no backroom deals. Tom found me there an hour later. He looked wretched. "Maya," he started, his voice barely a whisper. "I'm so sorry." "Save it," I said, not turning to look at him. "You don't understand," he pleaded. "She had me. The approval for my deck. She found a loophole, said it violated a setback I didn't even know existed. She was going to force me to tear it down. My wife, we just finished it." I finally turned to face him. I saw the fear in his eyes. He wasn't a bad person. He was just a person who had something to lose. Brenda knew that. She finds people's leverage points and squeezes. "What did she offer you?" I asked. "She'd overlook my violation if I pointed out the flaws in your plan," he admitted, shamefaced. "She even gave me the talking points." He handed me a piece of paper. It was his speech from the meeting, written out in Brenda's neat, sharp handwriting. He then gave me the one thing that changed the game. "This is the schedule her contractor sent her," he said, handing me another printout. I thought you should have it. It was an act of penance. Small, but it was something." I took the papers without a word. He lingered for a moment, then turned and disappeared into the darkness. I was alone again. Back in my small house, I spread the documents out on my kitchen table. The telecom company's name from David, Tom's coerced speech, and now the contractor's schedule. It felt like I was staring at a map written in a foreign language, but somewhere in there was the truth. My eyes kept drifting to David's discovery, A telecom company doing landscaping. Why? And why only on the east border? My shed, the climbing wall? They were on the east border. I pulled up a satellite map of our community. The east side was a long, clear stretch of land, perfect for what? I looked at the contractor's schedule Tom had given me. It detailed the demolition of my shed, followed by ground leveling and access road prep. An access road for a new shed? That made no sense. You don't need an access road for a small structure. You need an access road for heavy equipment, for trucks, for cranes. My heart started to beat faster. I remembered Brenda on her phone, always near that east border. I grabbed my jacket. The night was far from over. I went back out, but not to the climbing wall. I walked the perimeter of the park, following the fence line on the east side. The ground was soft from a recent rain. I saw something that made me stop. Tire tracks, not from a car. These were deep, wide grooves, the kind left by a heavy truck. They were fresh, and they led from the street, along the fence, and stopped right behind the area where my shed stood. And then I saw it. Tucked away behind a cluster of bushes, almost invisible in the dark, was a small wooden survey stake with a bright orange ribbon tied to it, the kind used to mark a construction site. It all clicked into place with a sickening thud. The telecom company, the access road, the survey stake, the $50,000 shed was a ghost. It was never going to be built. It was a smokescreen, a line item in a budget designed to justify clearing a path. The real prize wasn't the tiny patch of land my shed sat on. The real prize was the access. She wasn't trying to build a shed. She was paving the way for a cell phone tower, and my little wooden shed, my school's heart, was the only thing standing in the way of the bulldozers. The demolition wasn't the goal, it was the first step, and she was using the Homeowners Association's money and authority to do it. The sheer breathtaking audacity of it left me speechless. She wasn't just a bully, she was a con artist on a grand scale. The game wasn't chess, it was a heist. Standing there in the dark, with the damp earth smelling of secrets, the entire scheme laid itself bare in my mind. The insurance directive, the online smear campaign, the coerced betrayal from Tom, the absurdly expensive ghost shed, it was all an elaborate performance to achieve one simple, ugly goal: clear a path for heavy construction vehicles. Brenda and her sister were playing a long game. They'd get a kickback from the telecom company for securing the location and access, a fee that would make $50,000 look like pocket change. My shed wasn't a liability. It was an obstacle, a tiny wooden nobody standing in the way of their payday. For a moment, I just felt a profound sense of exhaustion. How do you fight that? She had money, influence, and a complete disregard for the truth. I had a wrench and a ghost story. But then, the anger returned, cold and sharp. She had used the memory of a child's broken arm to ruin my name. She had threatened a good man's family to save a few bucks. This wasn't just business, it was personal. If you're still with me, maybe hit that subscribe button, because this is where things get interesting. I decided right then and there, I wasn't going to play defense anymore. It was time to set my own trap. I went home and pulled out the one document that started it all: the county's notice of a mandatory safety review. The review was scheduled for the next day. It was meant to be the final nail in my coffin. Instead, I decided to turn it into my stage. The next morning, I was up before the sun. I didn't spend my time preparing legal arguments. I spent it preparing a demonstration. When the county fire inspector, a serious-looking man named Miller, arrived at 10 a.m., Brenda was already there, flanked by her twin. They stood with their arms crossed, radiating smug confidence. They thought this was their victory lap. "Good morning, Inspector," Brenda said, her voice smooth as silk. "As you'll see, this structure poses a significant fire risk. We're eager to have it removed to ensure community safety." Miller grunted, clipboard in hand, and started his inspection. He noted the wooden frame, the proximity to the public climbing wall. It looked bad. I could see Brenda's smile growing. "Inspector," I said, stepping forward, "you're right. Fire safety is paramount here, which is why I'm less concerned about this old shed, and more concerned about the primary fire lane access for this entire section of the community." Brenda's smile faltered. "What are you talking about? The access is fine." "Is it?" I asked. I walked over to the path leading from the street, the same path the heavy truck had used. "According to the contractor's schedule," I said, holding up the paper Tom had given me, This path is scheduled to be widened into a temporary access road for construction. Let's see what that would look like. This was my live test, my one shot. I had spent the morning marking out the proposed width of the access road with bright yellow tape. The tape ran from the street, past my shed, and directly blocked the main path leading to the back of the climbing wall and the 3 houses beyond it. I then pulled out a canister of colored theatrical smoke, the kind used in stage productions. "Let's simulate an emergency," I said, and pulled the pin. A thick cloud of bright orange smoke billowed out, completely obscuring the path. It was a visceral, undeniable visual. Imagine this is a real fire. Your fire truck needs to get to those houses. But this new, safer construction plan has completely blocked the only route. Inspector Miller stopped writing. He walked over to the tape, looked at the billowing smoke, and then back at the official community site plan on his tablet. He was silent for a long, tense moment. He traced the lines on the screen with his finger. Brenda scoffed, trying to regain control. "This is ridiculous. It's a temporary road. It's for a project that will make the community safer." "What project is that exactly?" I asked, my voice calm. "The $50,000 shed, or the project that requires a survey stake from a telecom company?" I pointed to the orange ribbon, now clearly visible in the morning light. Miller looked up from his tablet, his eyes narrowed. He looked at Brenda, then at me, then back at the site plan. He zoomed in on one section. "Ma'am," he said to Brenda, his voice now cold and official, "your proposal also includes the installation of a new emergency water cistern at these coordinates." He pointed to a spot on his screen. "According to this map, that spot isn't empty land. It's the proposed foundation for a commercial telecommunications tower." The color drained from Brenda's face. Her mask of composure finally shattered. Her twin took a half step back, as if trying to physically distance herself from the implosion. The fire inspector didn't even look at her. He looked at me. "Your shed might have a few violations, ma'am," he said, "but her plan violates about a dozen state and federal fire codes." He turned back to Brenda. "All work on this site is hereby suspended, pending a full investigation into what appears to be fraudulent permit applications." The silence that followed was the most satisfying sound I had ever heard. It was the sound of a perfectly laid trap springing shut. Brenda just stood there, speechless. Her face, usually a mask of calculated control, was a mess of shock and disbelief. Her twin looked like she was about to bolt. Inspector Miller, all business, was already on his phone, speaking in the clipped, no-nonsense tone of someone reporting a major violation. The game was over. She knew it. I knew it. The investigation was swift and brutal. The telecom company, once they got a whiff of the fraud and the public scandal, canceled the contract so fast, it probably created a sonic boom. They didn't just walk away. They sued Brenda and her sister personally for misrepresentation and damages. Her carefully constructed house of cards collapsed in on itself. The fake landscaping contract, the kickback scheme, the pressure on Tom, it all came out. The Homeowners Association Board was thrown into chaos. Brenda and her sister were removed in disgrace. The $50,000 special assessment was, of course, canceled. The whole sordid affair became the talk of the neighborhood, a cautionary tale whispered over fences and in the aisles of the local grocery store. A few weeks later, the new hastily formed board called a meeting. They offered me a public apology. Then they made me an offer. They wanted to use community funds to tear down my old shed and build me a brand new state-of-the-art facility. It was their peace offering, a way to wipe the slate clean. They even suggested I could run for a position on the board. "You've earned it," the new president said. This was the moment, right? The hero's reward, the triumphant victory. Everyone expected me to say yes, to take the money, the power, the recognition. Have you ever gotten exactly what you thought you wanted, only to realize it's not what you need? I looked at the faces around the table, eager and apologetic, and I thought about my little wooden shed. It wasn't perfect, it was old, but it was mine. It was a testament to building something with your own hands. "No thank you," I said. The room went quiet. "I don't want a new shed," I explained, "and I don't want to be on the board. What I want is for us to fix what's broken." I pulled out the proposal I had made weeks ago, the $5,000 plan to retrofit my shed with fireproof panels. Instead of spending a fortune to replace something, let's spend a little to make what we have better, together. And that's what we did. The following Saturday, something amazing happened. A dozen neighbors showed up. Tom was there, his relief palpable. David came, offering advice and drinking iced tea. People who had written nasty comments online came with tool belts and apologies. We spent the whole day working, cutting panels, driving screws, sharing stories. We didn't just reinforce a shed, we started to repair the community. It wasn't about money or power, it was about taking responsibility. In the late afternoon, as the sun began to dip, the work was done. The shed looked the same from the outside, but it was stronger, safer. My school was safe. The kids were already back on the climbing wall, their laughter echoing in the warm air. I stood back, watching them. I didn't get a big payout. Brenda wasn't in jail, though her financial and social ruin was a prison of its own kind. My victory wasn't a gavel strike or a signed check. It was this: the sound of community, the sight of kids challenging themselves, learning to trust the rope, and trusting me. I reached into my pocket and felt the cool, familiar weight of the old wrench, my symbol anchor. I walked over to the youngest student, a shy little girl who was afraid of heights, and knelt down. "See this bolt?" I said, pointing to one of the anchors on the practice wall. "This is what keeps you safe." I placed the wrench in her small hand and helped her fit it onto the bolt, showing her how to check that it was tight. "Safety isn't just a rule someone writes down," I told her. "It's a promise you make, and you keep it." She looked from the wrench to me, a small smile finally appearing on her face. In that moment, I knew I hadn't just won a fight. I had passed on something more important than any lesson about climbing. I had kept my promise. And if this story resonated with you, let me know in the comments. It's a good reminder that sometimes the biggest victories are the quietest ones.